The Trumpet Daily from Jerusalem.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. A week ago, as you know, we passed the 11-year anniversary of 9/11. And without a doubt, the world changed dramatically on that September morning. On that day, the world watched in shock on live television as 19 Muslim zealots hijacked commercial jets and blasted a gaping hole through the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and also pulverized the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. Bible prophecy lurched into the fast lane on that September day, and it's been barreling ahead ever since. Today we'll highlight just one example that attests to that fact, the fact that prophecy is moving forward so fast. In the days that followed 9/11, there was a tremendous show of unity from Democrats and Republicans, congressmen and women from both political sides, Democrat, Republican. They stood together outside the Capitol building and sang, "God bless America." What a show of unity between these two rival parties. I mean, keep in mind that the government at that time in the United States had been bitterly divided over a very controversial presidential election from just a few months previous to that, the election between George Bush and Al Gore. But after September 11th, 2001, even though it turned out to be short-lived, America was a nation that was united. Now, 9/11 also revealed a strong and durable alliance between the United States and Britain. Before the tragedy, I mean, politically speaking anyway, George Bush and Tony Blair really were polar opposites. But after the World Trade Center was attacked, Tony Blair was one of the first world leaders to call President Bush, one of the first leaders to come to his aid. In fact, just a few days after the attack, Mr. Blair made his way to Washington, D.C. to offer his support. Notice this.
It's my honor to welcome my friend and a friend to America, Prime Minister Tony Blair, to the White House. I appreciate him coming to America in our time of need. One of the first phone calls I got after that terrible day was from the Prime Minister. He was reassuring to me. He showed to be a true friend, and I appreciate that. I'm so honored you're here, and I look forward to giving a speech tonight. The Prime Minister has kindly agreed to come and listen to it. So I'm not going to answer any questions tonight. I'm going to let my speech be exactly what I want to say to you. In the meantime, the Prime Minister's agreed to say a few comments and then take a couple of questions from you.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's my honor to be here and also to pay tribute to your leadership at this immensely difficult time. I was in New York earlier today, and it's perhaps only when you are actually there that the full enormity and horror of what happened comes home to you. And I said then I would like to repeat that my father's generation went through the experience of the Second World War when Britain was under attack during the days of the Blitz. And there was one nation and one people that above all stood side by side with us at that time. And that nation was America, and those people were the American people. And I say to you, we stand side by side with you now, without hesitation. This is a struggle that concerns us all, the whole of the democratic and civilized and free world. And we have to do two things very clearly. We have to bring to account those responsible, and then we have to set about at every single level, in every way that we can, dismantling the apparatus of terror and eradicating the evil of mass terrorism in our world. And I know that America and Britain and all our allies, will stand united together in that task. And I give you, on behalf of our country, our solidarity, our sympathy, and our support.
Thank you, sir.
I believe we have to go on fighting terrorism as long as it takes. Because what happened on the 11th of September was, of course, a brutal and horrific attack on America. But it was a demonstration of what these people are capable of in any part of the world. And the important thing to realize is that there is no limit on what they would do that is moral. They have no regard for the sanctity of human life. They don't share the values of democracy or freedom or justice. The only limits on what they do are practical or technical. And that is why it is our duty, I believe this, it is our duty to take action to make sure that at every level we can, how these groups are financed, how they operate, how they move about, the weapons that they acquire at every single level, we have to take the action necessary to put an end to it.
That's from a press conference on September 20th, 2001. And I remember seeing that live. And when I did, I asked myself at the time that I saw that press conference, will this be the last time that we see a strong and united front from the United States and Britain, these traditional allies? These two brother nations, as Mr. Blair noted there in his comments, had defended each other's freedom over the past century, time and again. Winston Churchill, during his famous Iron Curtain speech in 1946, described this alliance between the United States and Britain as a special relationship. And in the days that followed 9/11, we saw just how special that relationship was. Soon after the terrorist attack, by the way, Prime Minister Blair loaned the White House a bronze bust of Winston Churchill as a token of his appreciation, his encouragement, his support for the U.S. and for President Bush during this time of war. Now, that press conference that you just saw was, as I said, from the afternoon of September 20th, 2001. And later on that very same day, President Bush delivered his much-anticipated address before Congress. Take a look at these comments.
My fellow citizens, for the last 9 days, the entire world has seen for itself the state of our union, and it is strong. Tonight we are a country awakened to danger and called to defend freedom. Our grief has turned to anger, and anger to resolution. Whether we bring our enemies to justice or bring justice to our enemies, justice will be done. I thank the Congress for its leadership at such an important time. All of America was touched on the evening of the tragedy to see Republicans and Democrats join together on the steps of this Capitol, singing "God Bless America." And you did more than sing. You acted by delivering $40 billion to rebuild our communities and meet the needs of our military. Speaker Hassert, Minority Leader Gephardt, Majority Leader Daschle, and Senator Lott, I thank you for your friendship, for your leadership, and for your service to our country. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the world for its outpouring of support. America will never forget the sounds of our national anthem playing at Buckingham Palace, on the streets of Paris, and at Berlin's Brandenburg Gate. We will not forget South Korean children gathering to pray outside our embassy in Seoul, or the prayers of sympathy offered at a mosque in Cairo. We will not forget moments of silence and days of mourning in Australia and Africa and Latin America. Nor will we forget the citizens of 80 other nations who died with our own. Dozens of Pakistanis, more than 130 Israelis, more than 250 citizens of India, men and women from El Salvador, Iran, Mexico, and Japan, and hundreds of British citizens. America has no truer friend than Great Britain. Once again, we are joined together in a great cause. So honored the British Prime Minister has crossed an ocean to show his unity with America. Thank you for coming, friend. On September the 11th, enemies of freedom committed an act of war against our country. Americans have known wars, but for the past 136 years, they have been wars on foreign soil, except for one Sunday in 1941. Americans have known the casualties of war, but not at the center of a great city on a peaceful morning. Americans have known surprise attacks, but never before on thousands of civilians. All of this was brought upon us in a single day, and night fell on a different world, a world where freedom itself is under attack.
Now, that was probably one of Mr. Bush's finer moments. It was a stirring speech, but more than that, it was an inspiring scene. As I said, because members from both sides of the aisle set aside their political differences. It was an inspiring scene because of how the British people rushed to be at America's side. And it wasn't just Britain that offered its support. Israel, too, this little nation of Judah, as it's called in the Bible, Israel provided tremendous encouragement and support for America. Israel, after all, had withstood its share of terrorist attacks. It could identify with America during one of its darkest hours. 9/11 clearly revealed the strong and durable alliance that existed between the United States and Israel. Those two clips, as I said, that I just showed you were from September the 20th, just 9 days after 9/11. And here again, on that same day, September 20th, Benjamin Netanyahu gave a rousing speech in Congress before the House Government Reform Committee. He said, "What is at stake today is nothing less than the survival of our civilization. There may be some who would have thought a week ago that to talk in these apocalyptic terms about the battle against international terrorism was to engage in reckless exaggeration. No longer," he said. "We have received a wake-up call from hell. Now the question is simple. Do we rally to defeat this evil while there is still time, or do we press a collective snooze button and go back to business as usual? The time for action is now. Today the terrorists have the will to destroy us, but they do not have the power. there is no doubt that we have the power to crush them. Now we must also show that we have the will to do just that. Once any part of the terror network acquires nuclear weapons, this equation will fundamentally change, and with it the course of human affairs. This is the historical imperative that now confronts all of us. Now, at that time, what you just heard there was not considered a hardline position coming from the far right. Netanyahu's speech drew an unusually spirited and lengthy applause from Republicans and Democrats alike. Now, the day after that speech that I just read a bit to you right there, while he was still in Washington, Netanyahu talked about Israel's alliance with America on the program Washington Journal. Here's a short excerpt from that program.
Well, Israel has been on the front line of fighting terrorism for a long time, and in fact, we've been fighting this kind of militancy, which has its roots in centuries of resentment against the West, and you know, the bin Ladens of this world, and some of the regimes that support them, principally Iran, actually, but Iraq has its own interpretation of what I'm about to say. They want to reverse history. They want to roll back 1,000 years in which the West became supreme, and in their twisted view, Islam receded. They don't want to advance Islam through advancement, through progress. They want to destroy America. And so they attack America. If they can't destroy it today, you bring it to its knees. It'll take time. When you have the weapons of mass destruction, then all bets are off. And they're working to produce nuclear weapons feverishly. So for these militants, they don't hate America because of Israel. They hate Israel because of America, because they see Israel as an outpost of Western values and the very freedoms and liberalism in the larger sense of societal freedoms that they despise. Because of that, Israel has been fighting at the cutting edge between this terrorist militancy and the West. By the way, you put Belgium in there, the same thing would happen. You put Holland. It's that way of life, you know, that the fact that we can have this conversation, you can ask me anything and you can agree, disagree, that my wife and your wife can walk in the street and do whatever she wants, and that we can listen to any music that we want, and we can educate our children as we want. That is an abomination to these people. So that hatred is there. Now, not for what we do, but for what we are. The question is, what does Israel do? It's part of this alliance inherently. It's been supporting the United States. There wasn't a day, I can say, in the 3 years that I was Prime Minister, that our intelligence services didn't pass on significant intelligence to you, and may I say it was a two-way street. So we're really, it's as close an alliance as you can have, and we will help in any way that we can. We have some of our own problems, as you know. We have a terror base under Yasser Arafat right next door. So I think we've got a network that we have to neutralize, and each of us will do our part.
Now, in viewing all of these clips from 11 years ago, isn't it amazing to consider how different the world is today than it was back then? In 2001, the band around these three brothers, America, Britain, and Israel, it was strong and enduring. And today we see that band that once bound the brothers together so tightly, it's completely unraveled. Well, just a month into his presidential term, U.S. President Barack Obama decided that the relationship between the U.S. and Britain was not really that special. It was just like any other relationship that the United States had. As one State Department official told the London Telegraph, there's nothing special about Britain. You're just the same as the other 190 countries in the world. You shouldn't expect special treatment. Well, how do you suppose Britain felt about that comment? How do you think President Bush would have thought about that? You heard what he said back in 2001, how he valued that special relationship with Tony Blair and the British people. But how quickly that changed. What a slap at the face of Britain. And of course, this coincided with the White House rejecting Britain's offer to extend the loan of that bust of Winston Churchill that had been there in the Oval Office since September the 11th, 2001. Almost 8 years. There was that statue of Churchill's head, his bust. Churchill, by the way, he said back in the World War II era that the weakening alliance between the U.S. and Britain was what allowed the Second World War to happen. Had the two nations been more closely united during the intervening years between the two great wars, he said, this was back in 1941, he said this in a speech to Congress, he said the curse of World War II would not have happened if these brothers, he said, would have stayed united. He said prodigious hammer strokes have been needed to bring us together again. Do we not owe it to ourselves, to our children, to mankind tormented, to make sure that these catastrophes shall not engulf us for the third time? That's quite a sobering warning. That's quite a history lesson. And it's a history lesson that it looks like we've failed to learn. Now, what about Israel? What about the United States and Israel? If you go back into the history there as well, you see this close relationship unlike any other, really. Back in 1962, President John F. Kennedy told the Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir, he said the United States has a special relationship with Israel in the Middle East, really comparable only to what it has with Britain over a wide range of affairs. How about that? JFK talking about the United States, Britain, and this little nation of Israel. Another special relationship that has since been ruined. Well, just last week, Charles Krauthammer titled his column, The Abandonment. Now, what do you suppose he was talking about there? He was talking about this relationship, or lack thereof, between America and Israel. He said, not since its birth 6 decades ago has Israel been so cast adrift by its closest ally. The Obama policy is a double game, a rhetorical commitment to stopping Iran, yet real-life actions that everyone understands will allow Iran to go nuclear. Krauthammer says, yet at the same time that it does nothing, the administration warns Israel sternly, repeatedly, publicly, even threateningly, not to strike the Iranian nuclear program. With zero prospect of his policy succeeding, Obama insists on Israeli inaction, even as Iran races to close the window of opportunity for any successful attack. Now, Israel, as you probably know, has been pleading for the United States to draw a red line with respect to Iran and to at least threaten force if Iran doesn't comply. But the U.S. has said no. The U.S. has said we'll keep right on negotiating. And of course, this weak stance is what prompted this response from Prime Minister Netanyahu just last week.
The world tells Israel, wait, there's still time. And I say, wait for what? Wait until when? Those in the international community who refuse to put red lines before Iran don't have a moral right to place a red light before Israel.
So Israel is left to go it alone on Iran. They're left alone, abandoned by the nation that's largely responsible for its establishment as a nation here in the Middle East. Now, few people realize that this brotherhood among three peoples, the Americans, the British, the Jews here in the Middle East, that this brotherhood was clearly evident, not just in the days that followed 9/11, but the roots of this relationship actually go all the way back to the very first book of the Old Testament. This critical historical context is fully explained in Herbert W. Armstrong's book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy. And as Mr. Armstrong covers in that book, just as God prophesied of the phenomenal rise to power for Britain, for the United States, Israel also, there's prophecies that speak of Israel being established as a nation in this end time. the same God who said all of these things, also prophesied of our simultaneous decline. Now, whether you agree or you don't agree with what Mr. Armstrong taught regarding these historical roots, look at the world. Look at how different it is in this day compared to 2011, and see the decline. Whether you agree with what Mr. Armstrong taught about the Bible is irrelevant. Look at what's happened in the last century. Look at how these nations have stood together, these three. And now that they're all breaking apart, these alliances, is that good for Western civilization? Is that good for the future of the United States, or Britain, or Judah, or little Israel, as it's called today? Now, if we're to believe what God has to say about these events, and He does have something to say about it, coinciding with this precipitous decline in world power and influence is the unraveling of the relationship that once bound these three brothers so tightly together. The prophet Isaiah described this dramatic unraveling, which, as he said, occurs just before the latter-day appearance of the prophesied Messiah. The prophet wrote, Manasseh shall devour Ephraim, and Ephraim, Manasseh. Those are the two nations, the United States and Britain. Isaiah says, together they shall be against Judah. That's Isaiah 9 and verse 21. You can look on into that on your own time. But what a perfect description there of the present-day relations between Israel, America, and Britain. These nations, historically, were family. And even in recent history, even in looking at the history books, they've been some of the strongest allies that you've seen in the world this last century or so. Each has been a critical partner, defender of the other two. But today, America and Britain are turning on each other. And together, as the prophet says there, they're going against the Jewish state. Now that is happening. These three Israelite nations, which have maintained such strong and durable alliances through the generations, they were actually prophesied in our day to forsake that special alliance and to engage in furious strife, contention with each other. Now that's happening. That's happening. That ought to make you sit up and take note of God's prophecies. Zechariah chapter 11 is another one that we've referred to quite often at the Trumpet.com. If you've been reading us, you know that we've been predicting this division between the biblical nations of Ephraim, Manasseh, and Judah. We've been talking about this for years, thanks to some very specific prophecies found in Isaiah, as we just read, or in Hosea, which we'll go to in just a second, and also here in Zechariah 11. Notice verse 14, it says, Then I cut asunder mine other staff, even bands, that I might break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. The band between these brothers is breaking. And we've written about this very specific prophecy a number of times, as I say, at thetrumpet.com. Now let's notice Hosea chapter 5. Because of this breakdown in this historical alliance, God says that Judah, the little nation called Israel today, will eventually turn to Germany for help in time of need, rather than the nation that it's generally gone to for help, and that's the United States. Notice what Hosea 5 verse 13 says, When Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah saw his wound, then went Ephraim to the Assyrian, that's modern-day Germany, and sent to King Jareb, yet could he not heal you nor cure you of your wound. Now that wound, as we've said so many times before, is the Middle East peace process. It's caused this nation of Judah, Israel today, to be wounded. And what's going to happen in the months, perhaps a few years ahead, wounded Judah and sick Ephraim are going to go to the rising power in Germany for help. Why? Why won't they go to America? Because America, by that point, will be even sicker than both of them and won't be able to provide any help. And as I say, this is a foreboding development for all three of these peoples, Ephraim, Manasseh, and Judah. Verse 5 in this same chapter says, "And the pride of Israel," that's speaking of America primarily, "and the pride of Israel does testify to his face. Therefore shall Israel and Ephraim fall in their iniquity, and Judah also shall fall with them." This is where these unraveling ties will ultimately lead. This brotherly division, these shifting world alliances, they're not strengthening the United States and Britain and Israel. You can be sure about that. They're making our peoples more vulnerable to the threat of invasion of ascending world powers, powers that we now see rising all around us. Now, for much more on this subject, make sure you obtain that book I referred to earlier, The United States and Britain in Prophecy. Get your free copy of that book. We'll send it out to you right away. And more than get it, study it. Study that book. We also have a very informative packet on the band that kept this brotherhood together that you heard about on today's program. And we'll send you a free copy of that reprint packet as well. We thank you for joining us as always today, and we'll see you again next time.